the Mishcon Academy Digital Sessions.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining this Mishcon Academy session, part of a series of online videos, events and podcasts looking at the biggest issues faced by society today. Just to introduce myself, I'm Naman Bhatt. I'm a lawyer here in the employment team at Mishcon, and I will be introducing today's event before handing over to our host, Patrick Connolly. Before I introduce our special guest, I do have some housekeeping points to mention. If you're online, you've automatically been added on mute and without video. If you have a question, you can use the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen, and Patrick will pick this up. If you have any technical issues during the event, please feel free to let us know via the chat, and one of the Mishcon team will help you. And if you're in the room, please just raise your hand. So, today is an extremely special Academy session, as we're joined by one of the biggest and most globally recognised pop stars in history, and a true icon of British music. She first came into our lives as a member of the Spice Girls, the most successful girl band of all time, who burst onto the scene in 1996, and, in the case of our guest, did so complete with high kicks and backflips galore, and left an indelible mark around the world. It's not an overreach to say that they changed the landscape of pop music, popular culture, and the wider entertainment industry, and made an impact that we still feel and talk about to this day. To be honest, our guest today doesn't really need an introduction, but at the risk of sounding like a Wikipedia page, the stats are so impressive, I think it would be remiss of me not to mention just a few of them. Over 100 million records sold around the world, 9 UK number ones, 3 consecutive Christmas number ones, a debut single that topped the charts in 37 countries, and the best-selling album by a female group in history. As a solo artist in her own right, our guest has maintained a long and hugely successful career across 3 decades now, with multiple number one hits and 8 solo albums, including her most recent self-titled record, which hit the top 10 upon its release in 2020. For all of those impressive stats, though, perhaps the biggest mark left by the Spice Girls, and the true extent of their legacy, is the stuff that isn't so easily quantifiable, but which actually matters the most. These 5 women together were simply a force of nature that broke down barriers and touched an entire generation with their spirit, their energy, and their ethos. Speaking personally, as someone who was born in the 80s and grew up in the 90s, I remember the Spice Girls' arrival coming at a key time. My parents were immigrants from Pakistan, and they brought me and my siblings up in a very traditional way. When it came to entertainment, we listened to Bollywood songs, we watched Bollywood movies, and Pakistani dramas, which were all really good, don't get me wrong, but that's pretty much all we knew. When the Spice Girls came out, though, there was just no escaping these amazing songs that would be played everywhere, at school, in the shops, on TV. Not only was their arrival completely contagious, but for me personally, it was my first proper introduction to English music, and in turn became this gateway into a whole other universe of music, art, culture, and media in the Western world, which I went on to fully absorb and embrace. They played an integral part in helping me connect with the British part of my identity and navigate these 2 different cultures that I belong to as I grew up. That's just my personal experience, but there were so many other groups of people who connected with them in a really profound way. Their accessible form of feminism and girl power messaging, for example, struck a nerve with millions of young girls around the world, giving them some much-needed confidence in themselves and inspiring them to be anyone they wanted to be. Young girls who became young women, many of whom went on to inform and fight for huge changes in society's attitudes towards women, such as with the Time's Up and the Me Too movements. Members of the LGBTQI+ community also connected with the group's messages of empowerment, individuality, and possibility, inspiring them to be themselves and pursue their dreams and not feel so alone. Some 25 years later, our guest continues to pursue her passion for performing, spreading positivity and inspiring people with her unparalleled work ethic and openness about key issues facing today's society, such as body image, mental health, and self-worth. She has performed for millions of people in some of the biggest venues in the world. She has rubbed shoulders with world leaders and royalty alike, no doubt with a million great stories to tell, and she's broken countless records along the way. And we're very honoured that she's here today to talk to us about her amazing life and career to date. So, without further ado, please give a very warm welcome to Sporty Spice herself, Melanie C.
What an intro.
There's not much left to say. Our work here is done.
So thank you so much, Man, for that intro. I think we can see from the room how popular this talk is. It feels like people at the back are about to sort of get on each other's shoulders to peer in. I want to start, not at the beginning, but at the end. So this year at Glastonbury, 2022, I was on the Thursday night. There's a really small field called, I think it's called Williams Green, and you were DJing there on the Thursday night. And I've never been in a tent so full. It was a bit like this room. And if a fire marshal had been in that tent, they'd probably closed down the festival. And not even just in the tent, but outside the field. They had to close the field because you were DJing. What is the long-lasting popularity of the Spice Girls, and specifically you, in 2022?
Oh, gosh. I think this whole idea, for me, kind of started in 2019. We did stadium shows here in the UK and Ireland, and I think that was the first time it really began to sink in for all of the Spice Girls, you know, the legacy that we'd created, and we knew it, but to kind of have some kind of acceptance of it really hadn't happened until we would see each night 70, 80,000 people losing their shit. We can swear, can't we? Yeah. I've got a measure of this room. Yeah, and it was, I don't know, it was just so visible and palpable at that time. You know, we'd had such an impact on not only a generation of young people, but there was kids at the gig who weren't born, you know, so it's something that lives on, and it's something we're so very proud of. And it just feels like a golden time, you know, the real hardcore Spice fans are like in their 30s now, which is it's a good age, you know, because it's an age where you're really accomplished in your life and you're achieving great things. You mightn't feel like it, but you are, trust me. So it just feels like, you know, it's a good time to be a Spice Girl.
And you mentioned younger people, so my 8-year-old daughter has got a picture of the Spice Girls above her bed. Like, why is it reaching such young people? I
think because of the initial reason it attracted young people in the 90s. You know, there was the colourful, you know, if we just go with the onlooking, you know, great music, you know, real fun, that sense of fun that, you know, the people together really enjoying everything. I think that drew in. We were the first band to have very young listeners. Like, we had kids at our gigs who were like 3 years old, you know. Children of that age hadn't really gravitated towards their own music until that point. You know, you were listening to your parents' music, weren't you? I mean, for me, it was like when I became a teenager is when I went out and got my own stuff. But yeah, it just appeals to people, and it continues to do so.
You've talked a lot about the Spice Girls, but specifically you. It was you DJing, and then on the Saturday, the Blossoms were playing on the Saturday on the other stage. Mm-hmm. I mean, there was a lot of Mishcon at Glastonbury. Probably there was a few people watching the Blossoms. And then you came out on stage and did Spice Up Your Life with the Blossoms. And it was a bigger reaction, you coming on stage, than when Dave Grohl came on stage with Paul McCartney. Like, why? And I was at both, so that's a fact.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Why, like... Why does everybody love you so much?
You know, I think... What can I say? No, do you know what? I think as well, with something like Glasgow, it's such a British thing, you know. We do have the best festival in the world. I've not been to all of them, but, you know, the way... The festivals I've experienced and, you know, and people who were there, there's nothing like Glasgow. And so I suppose a Brit... I kind of feel like someone that a lot of British people are very proud of, you know, that part of our heritage. To see that Brit up there doing good, you know, we want to celebrate that.
I feel like you're being a bit modest.
And I'm fucking brilliant.
That's what we wanted. So let's then go back, way back, to growing up in Liverpool. Can you talk about what it was like growing up in Liverpool and your family?
Yeah, so I come from a very working class background. I grew up in the northwest, just outside Liverpool, just in between Liverpool and Manchester, really. I spent most of my childhood in a place called Widnes. Anybody know Widnes in the room? Yeah?
One person.
Charming, industrial. I'll be careful. But no, it's a hard-working town. You know, it was a very industrial town when I was growing up there. And times were tough. You know, my mum had to work really hard to make ends meet, and I had these big dreams, and those big dreams to me meant I had to get away from that area. I had to move down to London, and that I did, and thankfully I did.
Just before we get to London, your family setup, I was listening to Desert Island Discs. Was that 2019 as well, Desert Island Discs? Around there. Let's call it 2019. So Desert Island Discs, you were talking about your family setup, and something I noticed you mentioned there, you kept talking about being a spare part. What did you mean by that?
So my parents divorced when I was about 3 years of age, and I think this was like 70s, and it was more unusual then. I think just traditionally the way our culture has been, people have been encouraged to stay together for the kids, or, you know, to make it work, to work at it, or to be utterly miserable with someone you don't fit with anymore. But, you know, my mum, I have so much respect for her. She wasn't happy, and she moved on. But it made me a little bit unusual within my friendship group, and it rocked my little world in a way I didn't understand then, because your childhood is your childhood. It's all you know, isn't it? But I realise as I'm older, you know, it made me feel like an outsider, because both my parents remarried, went on to have further children, which is so common today. You know, I think the kind of normal family is really unusual, you know, what we would deem to be mum, dad, children. But yeah, back then I didn't have anybody to identify with who was the same as me. So it sometimes made me feel like I wasn't really worthy of this place. I kind of felt like I'd failed in my job, like I'd come, you know, on this earth, and mum and dad loved each other and they had this child, but they didn't stay together. And I felt like it was my fault for some reason, which is, you know, it's the mind of a child, isn't it? When you grow up, you begin to understand adult relationships, but it's the childhood that molds and shapes you.
And I think everyone's got a copy of the book, hopefully, and there's lots at the back.
There's good pictures in it.
Great pictures in it. And an amazing picture, actually, just to go off a complete tangent, of Adele when she was about 11 in front of loads of Spice Girl posters. That's one of my favourites. But in the book, you talk so honestly, and it's such an amazing book, about growing up. There was a particular story that I know you talked about with Elizabeth Day, I think last week as well, where your mum went away and she left you, I think, with a childminder. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so my mum's also a singer. So around this time, you know, when I was little and she left my dad, I'm trying to think of how old she was. She was only in her late 20s or very early 30s. So she was still pursuing a career, working in music, and she still sings today. My stepdad is a bass player, so they worked together. And when they had certain jobs, it would take them away from home. So this particular summer season that they had one year meant she'd be away from me for quite some time. I mean, she was popping back, but she couldn't be there on a daily basis. So she interviewed some people and got some young girl to look after me. But, you know, sadly, she wasn't really up to the job, and I was often left, which, you know, my poor mum, she had no idea, and I wasn't that vocal about it at the time. And I don't know why. I don't know why I didn't tell her. But I would often get home from school and there was nobody home. And I was only like, I think I was about 5 at this point. Yeah.
And with experiences like that and what we've talked about before growing up, how much do you think that shaped the sort of person you were growing up?
I absolutely did. And I think, you know, those little feelings of, oh, you know, I don't really fit in, like, there's that family there and that family there, and I'm like a bit of a spare part. Because I think sometimes, because I'm an only child of my mum and dad, it's a little bit like, I felt like I was a burden. You know, it was always like, oh, we've got to ship her off there or ship her off there. And, you know, there was always trying to make plans to make sure that I was taken care of. And I think, yeah, the shaping of me, things like that, I think it just compounded those thoughts and feelings.
I do think only children are the best, though.
Do you?
Yeah.
That's lucky, because I have an only child.
So do I as well.
Yeah. She's hard work.
Oh, yeah, really?
She's 13, so, you know, it comes with the territory.
So I've got an 8-year-old, so I'm just
you're still in the nice
future.
bit.
Really?
Yeah.
What's going to happen?
Well, a lot of teenagers, you don't want to know. Just wait.
So, I've just forgot there was those people in the room. So you talked about going down to London and one thing that really comes out in the book is the advert and applying for the advert to go to not the Spice Girls but Touch. My view of the Spice Girls, where they were sort of a manufactured band that was sort of created, can you talk about that first stage of applying for the advert and how it came about?
So I went to Performing Arts College in Kent, in Sidcup, and because my dream was to work in the music industry, but I knew that was incredibly difficult. My mum had had experiences in the 70s of being signed with various different bands, but it had never quite gone as far as she would have liked it to have gone. So for me, I grew up in this household where there was always musicians and music, and mum was always out gigging, but I just knew it was so hard to actually make that your career, because mum always did day jobs as well. You know, she did music more for the love of it than it paying the bills. And I thought, okay, musical theatre, I love musical theatre. I love to dance as well as sing and a little bit of acting. So musical theatre college felt like the right place for me to go. It felt like a more sensible way to accomplish these dreams of being a performer. So yeah, I got down here, did 3 years, and then you're out in the big wide world and doing your auditions. And this flyer, I was sitting with a friend at an audition, and this flyer was handed to me, and it was, you know, are you between, I think it was like 18 and 24, and all these things, outgoing, dancing. And I was like, that's it, that's what I'm gonna do. And I went along, it was an open audition. And it's so funny because I was sitting, it's still there, I rehearse there sometimes. There's a place called Danceworks, it's on Balderton Street, just opposite Selfridges. And I mean, I actually can't believe these dance studios still exist. I don't know how they survive. But we were in there, you know, this must have been like 94, and sitting in there, that's where I got it. And yeah, it was just another audition.
And did you just go to the audition and they just signed you up?
Went to the audition, we had to dance, freestyle to Eternal Stay.
Good song.
It's a good song. So out of that, it was very superficial. So out of that, you were looked at, and you were approved to go and sing. So then I went to the next bit and I sang. I'm So Excited, the Pointer Sisters, mainly because my mum had the sheet music.
I thought you were going to say because it's on the Crunchy advert.
When was it on the Crunchy advert?
It might have been a bit later.
Yeah, I don't know. That's
his
a
obscure
strange thing
reference.
to remember, isn't it?
Katie got the reference.
That is quite obscure. I think you'd be good in a pub quiz team.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got in to sing, and then there was a recall process, which was a few days later, but I was ill and I couldn't make it. So the band was put together, the original band, and I wasn't in it.
So how did you get in it? Spoiler alert, she got in the band. How did you get in the band?
Well, lucky for me, not so much for the girl, one of the people didn't work out. So they got back in touch and said, look, come and sing for us again. And I went down, and that was it. I was in the band.
So when you went to see them, presumably there was some existing members there. Like, what was your first impressions of them?
And my first impressions, were so accurate. You know, I still feel the same about. I can vividly see them in front of me.
Because Emma wasn't in the band, was she?
No Emma at this point. There was a girl called Michelle, and Jerry. You might have heard of her, and Mel B and Victoria. So yeah, I walked into the room and Mel B was there all loud and northern with her incredible hair and just dressed so cool. I just thought, oh my God, she's the coolest person I've ever met. And then Jerry was there, all wide-eyed, in a charity shop jumper and pointy boobs. And yeah, and she was all she was barking like a dog. That's Jerry. So yeah, and then Victoria was just very coolly sitting in the back going, hey. So I was like,
and then what happened to Michelle?
So Michelle was at a crossroads in her life. we were kind of between. I mean, Emma's the youngest. She was 19 when we first got together. I was 20, and Michelle was contemplating girl band, uni, and which is very understandable. Who knew it was going to work? Well, 4 of us kind of were making sure it was going to work. So yeah, our minds weren't in alignment with Michelle, so she kind of drifted away.
She has got her own Wikipedia page. I've checked it out, so if anybody wants to look her up.
Do you know what I could imagine then? And she's here today!
She's
Can
sitting
you imagine?
in the front row. What would you
Now
like to
she's
say
a lawyer! Woo! She did so well.
When was the last time you met her?
Probably the day she said goodbye.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, did she even say goodbye? I know. We're going to give someone that idea now.
Yeah. So my preconceptions was you applied for this advert, the album was pre-written for you, you just recorded this album and then it came out, but it was a bit more complicated than that because you didn't stick with the people who recruited you.
Yeah, so this is the Spice Girls. Nothing is simple. So we had this, lovely management who obviously saw something in us. They put the five of us together. We were singing other people's songs, and there was talk of a lead singer, there was talk of us dressing the same or coordinated, and none of these things really sat well with us. We wanted it to be a democracy. We realised quite early on we're so different. Even the way we dress, if we all tried to dress the same, somebody felt and therefore looked uncomfortable. So we were like, let's just be who we are as individuals. No one's ever done that. And so all of these things happened quite organically. And we were beginning to get quite frustrated with the management. And also, we wanted to run before we could walk. We were like, we're together. We've been rehearsing for 2 weeks. We're ready. We want to take on the world. And they're like, no. Slow down. So we did spend a few months in development, and then we kind of come together. That was probably our first, what we like to call Scooby-Doo moment. So we decided collectively that we were frustrated. We wanted to move on. We had different ideas about the band. So we kind of manipulated them into a position where we had a showcase, and we performed for the very first time in front of songwriters and producers and publishers.
And were you performing songs that ended up on the album?
No, these were still the songs that had been written by other people, and they were, they were all right songs, but they just didn't represent us. We weren't saying what we wanted to say, but it was giving us an opportunity for people to see the potential. So we went out and we did that, but our grand plan was, we're going to meet these music industry people. Because remember, we were completely outside of the industry. We didn't know anyone. We didn't really know much at all. So we got to meet this room full of people. We got some numbers, and we'd already planned that we were going to do what we call our midnight flip, but I think it was at 10 o'clock in the morning. But, we have our artistic license.
And so then when you started writing the first album, that was after you'd split from this management. Can you talk about the writing process and how you were creating that album?
Yeah. So one of the people in that room was a guy called Biff, Richard Stannard, and he went on to be, one of our most successful songwriting partnerships with a guy called Matt Rowe, and together we wrote Wannabe, To Become One, Viva Forever, Goodbye.
But you really wrote them, you wrote them collaboratively with these guys, and really comes across in the book, and your experiences at the time. You were bringing to the songwriting. Yeah,
exactly. Well, Matt and Biff were so important. We did work with other songwriters on the record, but these guys were so important in our development because, they really understood us. And I think they knew what we were trying to achieve. And of course, we were going into this environment now, a music studio. None of us had ever been in one, and we'd never, I'd kind of written a few songs, but we weren't, none of us musicians to any extent where we could play, and we were just shouting out ideas and pulling up songs that we liked, and and all these different things, and Matt and Biff were able to kind of hone that into something that actually resembled a song, and that was kind of how it grew, and we formed our identity as a band.
And then Simon Fuller came along, and some of you might have heard of Simon Fuller. He's like a Simon Cowell equivalent, but more in the background. Do you not like me saying that?
No, I think that's a really good description of him.
So did he turn up after the album largely had been done?
Do you know what it's like? Sorry, I've gone off on a tangent now. So Simon Cowell and Simon Fuller, they worked together on the Idol series, and they both have dark hair. Physically they're quite different, but they're almost like versions of each other. I can't decide which is the evil twin.
Because did Simon Cowell reject or you?
He did. Yeah, so it was before Simon was known to the wider public. He was a record executive at the time, and he was one of the people we went in to see when we were looking for a record deal. And he wasn't interested in the Spice Girls. I think it's obviously something he regrets in his life, but he was never the right fit for us anyway. knowing what we know now. And I think even then, the artists you had like Robson and Jerome and Zig and Zag,
He did well.
He's done all right. He's done rather well. But, it was very different to 5 young women saying, this is what we want to do. I don't know if that relationship would have clicked. I mean, I get on fine with both Simons, actually. But yeah, I don't know if it's the right pairing.
But you went with Simon Fuller, and then he was the one that really sort of supported you in the launch.
So
because he was there before Wannabe was launched, the first single.
Yeah, so, I mean, the big difference we have to say between Simon Cowell and Simon Fuller is music management. They're both music men, music lovers, and obviously very successful in the music industry. But, Cowell was more of a record company guy, now TV personality. And, Simon Fuller's much more, as you said, behind the scenes, real ideas man. And it was interesting because it's ridiculous when you think back, but we really did take matters into our own hands. And this is what I love, and I love how this legacy, I feel like it's out there with people. It's like, tell the Spice Girls what not to do is only going to make them do it, So when people told us we couldn't do things, then we had to prove them wrong. And we went out as complete unknowns to music industry people, like labels, you want to sign us. We went to, we auditioned managers, we hadn't done anything. We hadn't sold a single record, we hadn't even made one. So it's just a very, psychologically, it was really interesting how that worked in our favour. And Simon Fuller was the first person to approach us about management. And he manages, and did at the time, Annie Lennox, which for me, I'm a huge Annie and Eurythmics fan. I grew up idolising her and singing along to her in my bedroom. So that was impressive to me. And he just believed that we could do all the things we said we wanted to do. We wanted to be the biggest band in the world. We wanted to make a movie. We went to him with all these big ideas and he was like, yeah, we can make that happen.
And I remember reading the book, he didn't want Wannabe to be the first single, or somebody didn't want Wannabe to be the first single?
The label were very nervous about Wannabe being the first single. And, we loved Wannabe, but we can see it's not the best song ever written in the world, But it's an introduction to the Spice Girls. It kind of captures the chaos and the energy that we create. So we felt if it's not a first single, it will never see the light of day. And we just put our foot down. Again, we came together, the 5 of us, in agreement, which is where we have our strength. And we stood up to the label, and we even stood up to Simon because he was a bit wobbly too. And we were like, "No, it's the first single." And luckily, because who knows what would have happened.
And there's a really good quote in the book, and I can't remember if it's from one of the songwriters. It said, if you're going to launch a band, you have to be the Beatles, you have to be the first to do something.
Yeah.
Who was it that said that?
That's Richard Stannard, Biff, yeah.
And thinking back over the Spice Girls, there was nothing like the Spice Girls. Even Eternal were all sort of dressed the same, had very similarities. Take That looked very similar. And even looking back over your past performances, you all sing, you all dance, you all have your part, you all have your different personalities. Was that, you've talked a bit about it already, was that very important to all of you? Absolutely.
And I think especially when we realised that was striking a chord, it was like, oh wow, this actually is something really important. And we started to talk about girl power. Never our intention when we started as a band, but people were telling us girl bands don't sell. We were told time and time again, girls can't do this, right? Never say that to a Spice Girl. So we were like, okay, this is important. We have to be a girl band for girls. And then quite quickly, when the single started to do well and we started to form a fan base, we realised that we had a huge following in the LGBTQI+ community as well. And it was like, okay, this isn't about girls alone. This is about people. This is about individuality. This is about, being who you want to be, whatever that may be. But it's about the unity, coming together throughout our, without our, what's the right word to say it, coming together regardless of our differences,
And Wannabe came out, obviously huge success. At what point did you realise I am massively famous?
I probably thought that after I'd been on Surprise Surprise with Cilla Black.
Really? Wow, that's a good 90s reference.
Yeah, isn't it just? But it was like, nah, no one had a clue. One little telly show. But it's so funny, isn't it? I think, growing up, in the UK, and I suppose always wanting to be a performer, so being very interested in entertainment and how it all works. So I'm watching the telly all through the 80s, the A-Team, you know, Top of the Pops. I like the references. And I'm like, wow, when you've been on the telly, everyone knows who you are and you're loaded. Both of those things are bollocks. Do you know what I mean? It takes quite a while before you get both of those things. So, yeah, I thought I was famous immediately, which was nonsense. But then Wannabe came out. The second week it went to #1. We were in Japan at the time promoting the album. We came back and that was it. From that moment on, life has never been the same.
When, like, in that time, like, coming back from Japan, like, what's it like on a day-to-day basis? Like, in terms of both your time being organised for you and people just constantly wanting to talk to you?
So when we got back from Japan and things had really took off, and I think Wannabe ended up staying at #1 for about 7 weeks, so it cemented it being a success. And then, of course, it was, they're a one-hit wonder. But we knew we had great songs to back it up and a great album. So the schedule already was getting crazy. So from that moment on, it was a bubble. And we were in it for, you know, pretty much 2 years, and we didn't really stop. It was intense, and it was exciting, but it was hard, yeah, and disorientating.
And do you actually get a say about what you're doing? Like, is things just scheduled for you? You're doing this, and then this, and then this?
You know, we were learning at the time, so there was obviously things we knew we wanted to do, like Top of the Pops or, you know, whatever TV shows were around at the time. But it's, yeah, I think it's the amount of work which is a bit shocking to you, because, I mean, it's even more now because of the internet and social media and everything. But even, you know, back in the day, it was really long days, lots of interviews, lots of travelling, different time zones. And yeah, it's relentless, but it's so exciting. Your adrenaline kind of powers you through quite a lot of it.
Yeah. I think one of the most, I was watching back on YouTube, the 97 Brit Awards with Jerry's Dress, and just how exciting it was, because that's like the year after you just came out. Do you remember that performance?
Yeah, well, we were at the Brits in '96 before we'd released anything, so nobody really knew who we were. And then fast forward a year, and it was our Brits, you know, it was our night. And we'd spent the whole year travelling because, you know, we were so fortunate. We did have international success. So we'd been all around the world, and we'd come home. And that just felt like our night when we were really welcomed back with open arms and celebrated because, you know, we quite literally flew the flag around the world.
Does anybody remember Smash Hits? Huge nods in the front row. The front row is very good for getting all my references. So I've got Smash Hits from 1997.
Don't you need white gloves on to handle that?
Here we go, look. This is an interview you did in '97. I'm sure you remember it very well.
Oh, yes,
and all
word
the
for word.
that were
No,
asked.
not the biscuit tin.
Do you actually remember the Biscuit tin?
Vaguely,
Yeah. It felt
yeah.
like you remembered it then.
Does it ask me if I was a biscuit, what biscuit would it be?
No, you had to pick them out from the Biscuit, but there was, I mean, some of the questions are absolutely outrageous. There's a good one here. What would you call your life story? Do you remember what you answered?
Oh, it'd be something to do with Liverpool Football Club, probably.
There was a lot of Liverpool answers. It wasn't that. I'd like to call it the rise and rise of Melanie Chisholm.
How good is that?
Is it too late? Can we change it?
Yeah,
Yes.
second edition.
Yes. I mean, there's some absolutely ridiculous questions.
I might
here
have
as
to have a
well.
little read of that later.
I don't really want to read out some of them. They're
Oh,
just
really?
absolutely ridiculous.
So intrigued. I'm intrigued. You're intrigued.
I mean, how
Give
many
us your
drinks?
worst. Go on.
How many drinks does it take you to get drunk? Do you remember?
Smash it. So
Do
inappropriate,
you remember what
isn't
you
it?
answered?
One sip and many ones. I don't know. Cheap date.
You said, I used to be quite a good drinker. It used to be about 4 pints, but I don't drink beer anymore because I started getting a beer belly. And then, I mean, the weirdest question is that Christian actually looked through this earlier and highlighted this question. I can't even find it now. Why do men have nipples? Like, that's the sort of question. I mean, did you get lots of ridiculous interviews like this?
Do you know what? In some of the interviews I've done for the book, I actually would have welcomed some of those questions. You know, we
I
did
hope I'm doing better.
You're doing brilliantly, yes. Questions like that, you know, the thing is, you're interviewed so often, what's changed a lot is it was quite shocking, some of the things we were asked on a more serious note.
But because I watched a Frank Skinner interview, and I know there was 2 Frank Skinner interviews, I think one of which you talk about in the book. There was an earlier one, and it was beyond shocking, some of the questions he was asking about, for example, about your sexuality, making jokes about it, about your body, and I felt very uncomfortable, and it sort of looked like you just had to laugh along with it because it's what was expected.
Yeah, I look back at certain things now, and I love Frank. You know, I know Frank independently of working with him, and he's a really lovely man. And, you know, my daughter hates it when I say this. It was a different time. I'm not saying that it was right or it was okay, but there was a lot of quite shocking things that women in the public eye had to deal with and put up with. Thankfully, that is changing. I'm not going to say it's changed because I think there's still a way to go, but it is definitely changing. It's crazy. It makes you feel very uncomfortable. And I, by nature, am a people pleaser. So if someone asks me a question, then I want to give them a really honest answer.
And it sort of leads on to lots of things you talk about in the book around the struggles you were having around the time when you were having your biggest success. Something you talked about was the night before the first gig you were having.
Yeah.
I think, was it in a hotel in Turkey?
Istanbul, yeah.
Yeah. If you're happy to talk about that.
Yeah, so it was, I mean, it's something I have buried and very, very rarely think about. But we'd been working together, so I think it was 97, and we were doing our first ever live show. So, you know, obviously we were hugely successful at this time. The eyes of the world were on us, and, you know, the lovely British tabloid media always trying to knock us down. This was the next big challenge, you know, can they do it? Can the Spice Girls sing? Can they hold their own for 90 minutes, you know? So there was a lot of pressure. But for me, it was the most exciting thing because it was the reason I wanted to do the thing, right? Is to get up on stage and perform to people, which when you work in pop music, weirdly, you don't do a lot of. So we got there, and the night before, I thought, I want to treat myself to a massage. And I was very inexperienced in that. I went down to like the spa in the 5-star hotel where we were staying in Istanbul, and I had, you know, I don't want to go into too much detail, but read it in the book. And I was made to feel very uncomfortable. You know, and it's a story of abuse because I felt very uncomfortable. And this all happened the night before this big gig.
And I think you do talk about it so openly and honestly, which is really important in the book. And I think people reading it, I think, will be really shocked when they do read it. When I read it, I was sort of thinking about the support mechanisms around the Spice Girls and around the band at the time. Yeah. Did they exist and did they kick in?
Well, again, you know, I hate the phrase, it was a different time. You know, I would describe the experience as a mild event, you know, but nevertheless, it doesn't mean it shouldn't have happened. You know, it shouldn't have happened to me. This person was in a position of trust. And yeah, what happened. And I went upstairs and our hair and makeup team were there. And my hairdresser at the time went down to find this particular person who'd already left, obviously, you know, knew what they had done. But other than that, there was a show to get on with. So it was kind of, I don't want to say it was brushed under the carpet, but it was never really properly dealt with. And I do feel, I like to think it's a little bit different now. Kind of depends on the environment you find yourself in. But there was no support. There was no psychological support. You know, our management, Simon, he was a pretty young guy too. What happened with the Spice Girls was pretty unprecedented. So everyone, even though someone like Virgin Records, even Simon, had dealt with successful artists, nothing of this magnitude, you know? So everyone was firefighting. It was just constantly like trying to do the best in the situation. And I think with hindsight, we can all look back and go, you know what, that could have been handled better.
And I think it was to sort of reflect on other things you really honestly talk about in the book. I think it maybe have been your previous management, before you'd released an album, you were around maybe their house and they made a comment about your body.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that and how it made you feel?
Yeah, so we had, with the original management, we had a financial backer. And, you know, nice enough guy, he was a little bit wide. And he just made a comment about my thighs, because I did a backflip in the garden. He said, I don't know, you can do a backflip with thighs like that. And it just, like, really affected me. And he did it in front of the girls, so it was humiliating. And I think from that moment on, I just started to think, oh my God, do I look the way I need to look to achieve this dream of mine? And that was, you know, really the beginning of me becoming much more aware of my body image, my eating habits, my attitude to exercising. You know, I'm not going to blame this guy, but his words really affected me and just, you know, started this little snowball effect, which was exacerbated by other things, you know, that I went on to experience.
And how did that develop during the Spice Girls?
I think it would just kind of, like I say, it was a snowball effect. So that happened, and there was another thing I've seen in your notes, where the Brits in '96, I had a little altercation with Victoria, and I told her to fuck off, basically, just under me breath. We'd had a few champagnes, and we were leaving, and I went, fuck off. And to me, it wasn't a big deal, but the next morning I was in loads of trouble, and I hate being in trouble. And I was told in no uncertain terms, if I behaved like that again, I'd be out of the band. And, you know, and I understand the reasons for that. You know, we had something precious, we needed to protect it. But for me, in the, you know, the space I was in at the time, it made me realise, I can't fuck this up, you know? I'm so close to, I didn't even realise my actions were so severe, and I have to control myself.
How did that link in with what we talked about before in relation to your family growing up and being a people pleaser?
I think because, you know, quite early on, I kind of felt, because I did feel alone in many ways, I felt like I have to make my place on this earth. You know, I have to find this place for myself. And in my head, that was fame. And, you know, I love performing, you know, to pursue that passion, to be successful in doing that, to be worthy of people's love, whether it's my parents, whether it's your fan base, whoever. You know, there's all the things going on inside me at this point. And so anything that jeopardised that had to be, you know, because I'm very disciplined as well. So things stopped. I was like, you know, any of these things that could come and interfere with what I was trying to do, which is what the girl was, they had to be pushed to the side. So, and then the control thing is, you know, it's very interesting because obviously my life was becoming out of my control. Like you said, the schedule wasn't really ours, you know, it's what we wanted to do, but we weren't in control of it. So I could control what I ate, I could control how long I was in the gym. So yeah, it just became more and more excessive.
And I think you had 2 Spice Girl albums and then you released your solo album, Northern Star. How bad were your mental health issues during that period when the solo album was coming out? So
throughout the late 90s with the girls, even though, you know, my eating was disordered and my exercise was becoming obsessive, I was in complete denial. It was just the way it was. That's the way I had to be to do the job that I was doing. And there was no option. So I was just getting on with that and doing that and having an amazing time being a Spice Girl, right? But then your body can only do that for so long. And I went away to start work on my first solo album, Northern Star. So it was 1999, I was in LA. And, you know, there was a little voice in my head going, you can't keep doing this, this isn't right. And I kept quietening that voice. But when I had the opportunity to be away from the girls and to be independent and start expressing myself as an individual, then I thought, I think I need some help with this. And that's when I first sought help, but I still wasn't quite ready. And I never stopped working. I never gave myself the breathing space to fully acknowledge what was happening. And my body just took over at one point, and it was the millennium when I started to have, you know, very low feelings and lethargy and struggling to get out of bed. And then, you know, I started binge eating, and, you know, that just started to escalate to the point where I was so scared because I didn't know what was happening to me that I did reach out and I went to my GP.
And what help did they provide, and how did you sort of take that forward?
I think just being diagnosed was help in itself, and I think saying things out loud. So my GP said to me, well, first of all, we need to address your depression. And I was like, I'm depressed? What? And I was like, it was such a relief, which sounds weird, right? I'm so relieved I'm depressed. But it was like a weight lifted from my shoulders because it gave it a name, and it meant that I could be helped, you know, and I could get better. Because up to that point, I just thought I'm losing my mind, you know? So I was on antidepressants, and it took me a long time to find the right prescription for me. And it's so frustrating because you just want to feel better, right? And it takes a couple of weeks for it to kick in, and then there might be various side effects, and then you don't really feel good on it. So then, okay, let's try another one, and then you have to wean off, and then you try a new one, and you know, it's a process. And I think it was by like the third type I found something that was like, yeah, this is really starting to feel different. Talking therapies alongside that. I like to try and do things as naturally as I can. So I explored things like acupuncture and reflexology and aromatherapy, and all of these things help. I mean, you know, a buzzword right now, self-care. But, you know, in all honesty, we need it. We need to do it. We don't take enough care of ourselves. And I think this is a room full of people, and everybody out there, you know, it's a stressful life, isn't it? You know, we work long hours. There's a lot of pressure on us. And we don't give ourselves enough time to, you know, to recuperate, to recover.
And I think you talking about it so openly in the book, both what you went through and then the solutions you found, is amazing for people to read that and realise they can do the same thing as well.
Yeah, it was really important to me because obviously, you know, all the Spice Girl stuff, it's really fun. There's loads of, you know,
good
interesting...
celeb stories.
Good celeb stories, yeah, lots of anecdotes. I wanted to be able to take people behind the scenes at those, you know, those iconic photographs, like everybody's seen them, whether it's the Union Jack dress or standing with Nelson Mandela and King Charles, just getting used to saying that, and you know, all these amazing pictures, but you get a bit of an insight. I wanted to kind of take the reader to those places, and that was all really important to me. But you know, but also the final deciding thing for the book was I have had some very difficult times in my life. Sadly, a lot of people have similar experiences. So, you know, it's not a self-help book, but I just wanted to offer my experiences in the hope that that could be helpful to other people.
And then thinking about post-Spice Girls, I mean, there's so much that you talk about in the book, such as all your amazing theatre work at Blood Brothers and Jesus Christ Superstar, which I went to see in the O2, which was amazing, and all sort of the music work. I mean, maybe reflecting on the musicals, how did you come to be in musical theatre, and do you enjoy it?
Absolutely love musical theatre. Theatre, wow, it's hard work. And it's funny because that's what I'd grown up thinking I was going to go into. And I didn't have the opportunity to work in the West End until, I think it was, so my daughter was born, it must have been 2009. And I had my little girl, and I hadn't put any pressure on myself. I didn't know how I was going to feel. I thought, you know, I'm very lucky in a position I didn't have to get immediately back to work. But when she was about 6 months old, I was starting to get a bit like, oh, I fancy doing something now. And this opportunity came up in Blood Brothers, which is a musical I love, and Mrs. J is such an incredible role. And I was like, this is perfect. I live up in northwest London, and it was on at the Phoenix, Charing Cross Road, and I was like, I'll be home every night, because my work, like music, takes me all over the world. I still travel quite a lot, but this was perfect. So I could be at home in the day. But it was so grueling. It was, yeah, but it was amazing.
You enjoyed it? I
really enjoyed it. It was a huge challenge. I did it for me. I didn't think about anything other than that. It was just a personal challenge. And I ended up getting nominated for an Olivier Award.
Which you should have won.
Oh, thank you very much.
I remember, because you talk about it in the book and different people were nominated.
Oh my gosh, it was a crazy. I mean, Sam Sparrow, I'm not sure how you say it, but she's amazing. And Hannah, is it Waddingham, who's in Ted Lasso, was also in the category as Best Actress in a Musical. So it was tough, but just to be nominated was an absolute honour, and And it's true. Should have fucked him on, though. No, I'm only joking. But that was a little bit of a turning point for me because with my solo music, I've gone through some like frustrating times when I've like wanted to be taken a bit more seriously. And, you know, when you come out of a band, it's like, you're never going to eclipse the band. You know that. I mean, okay, people have gone on to be as successful, if not more successful, like maybe Robbie and Harry. I talk about them like I know them. Well, I do kind of know them. But, you know, so they're the exceptions to the rule. But to come out of a band and be as successful is virtually impossible. But, yeah, like with my music, I've always been fighting to be heard. And then I went into the theatre for completely different reasons. And I wanted people to see there was more to me than Sporty Spice.
And I think the amazing thing with your music, that your most successful album of the last, like, 15, 16 years was your most recent album that came out in 2020.
Yeah.
And I think it does sound very different. It's got almost sounds a bit like Bastille, a bit like... do you not get that feeling?
No, it's just because I met Dan from Bastille at Glasgow.
Really?
And he's very, very lovely, yeah.
That's a good name drop.
Yeah.
I met Dan from Bastille at the Cricket a few weeks ago.
Did you?
Yeah, Shop Stories.
I bet was he in good shape there? Because he was enjoying Glasgow when I saw him.
Really? He was performing at the Cricket. It was the 100 final. So
I fell in love with him. What a lovely guy.
He's very nice. Yeah. But your most recent album, the song I love, I think it's about like track 5 or 6, Here I Am.
Oh, yeah? Oh, I love that.
It's a good track.
Have you seen me do that live?
No.
You need to come and see that.
Yes.
It's good live.
It is an amazing album. I mean, Northern Star is obviously a classic, but that album sounds very different, sounds like very modern, and like it's amazing, like enter the charts top 10, like amazing that your most recent album is one of your most successful.
I know, it's bonkers. I feel I'm so proud of that, and you know, it's been many, many years, and there's been lots of changes, like for me behind the scenes. And I started DJing about 3 years ago, and that reminded me how much I love dance music and house music. So that was very much an influence in this album, and yeah, it just people have enjoyed that.
People will definitely want to start asking questions soon, and I'm very conscious of time. There's a few other things I want to talk about. Gogglebox.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I think they just approached me.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I've just got lots of logistic questions about Gogglebox. Like, if they put something on, like, do you have to watch the whole thing? Or
No, it's 20-minute packages.
Yeah. There you go. Even the movie?
Yeah.
Really? I thought it's the whole thing. No. And if it's something you just don't like?
The news. I hate it when it's the news. And they make you watch the news twice.
Really?
Yeah.
And is it actually your house?
The first season, yes. Second season, no. Oh. Because I was moving at the time, so it was.
And do they give you lots of food? Like,
yeah, they do.
Is it?
It's a really good ride. You can have whatever you want.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it just seems so interesting.
These are the questions I enjoy.
Really? I'm trying to think of other logistic questions around Gogglebox. Is there like people with television cameras like him over there?
No, I'll tell you what's really fun, like really bizarre about Gogglebox. It's on a shitty little telly, right? And I've got like like we all have, haven't we? A massive telly on our wall, and you have to watch it on this. It's like something fucking Tesco's, right? Some like Bush telly. And like, what are we watching it on that for? And I think it's to do with the eye line. I don't know. So when they're filming, you're not like looking all over the place.
And you have to be a bit careful what you say.
Well, you have to self-police a little bit, but it's a really lovely team, and after doing season 1, we realised they're not there to stitch you up.
Yeah.
They want to take care of you. They want to make a really good show. So yeah, you become a little bit more relaxed. But I've kind of learned to try not say too much.
Yeah. And then final question before I open it up: what are the Spice Girls going to open with at Glastonbury next year?
Well, oh gosh, I hate to disappoint. We've never been asked to do Glasgow.
Yeah, you did say that, isn't it?
It's mad. It's mad.
Is that actually true?
It's actually true. Like, somebody else might have been asked, like, in the band, and they've gone, shh, I don't want to do it, don't ask the others. I don't think that's happened. I'm sure the request will come in at some point.
But you could play solo maybe next year.
I hope to. I will definitely be there. My Glasgow this year went so well. I'll definitely be back next year. I saw
a photo of Paul McCartney as well.
Yeah.
We have to go out to questions. We've got so many questions online. Naman is definitely going to ask the first question.
Hiya.
Hi.
You are the fourth of 5 Spice Girls to have written an autobiography. I just wondered if you spoke to any of the other girls about their experience, how they went about it, and whether they gave you any advice.
I spoke to the girls, obviously I wanted to let them know that I was going to do it. And I also used them for my memory gaps, which was useful. I mean, Mel B was very useful. Yeah, she made out she was useful. I'm not sure how useful she really was. No, she was. She's been brilliant. But I wanted to make this very much like my thing. I mean, even any autobiographies, I mean, I'm obsessed with autobiographies now. But I kind of wanted to find my own path with it. Yeah.
Emma?
Thank you so much for coming in. It's the most exciting day in the office in ages.
That's not a question.
Ever. I have grown up with the Spice Girls. You were wrong when you said that the die-hard Spice Girls fans were in their 30s. We're actually in our early 40s. And I grew up inspired and energised by the individuality and the ambition of it all. But I remember reading those articles and seeing how you girls women and then girls were reported on in the tabloids, and how you were pitched against each other, and how your bodies were pulled apart, and and everything was attacked. And I remember just thinking, that is such a tough ride. And perhaps that was the kind of seed that led me into my career. I'm now a reputation lawyer. I deal with people who are in the spotlight for whatever reason. And I wondered if you've grown, and you talk about things being a different time and how things have moved on. I wonder if you were talking to a 20 or a 30-year-old now who was rising in profile, who was, for whatever reason, either in business or in the arts, what you would say to her about not just the self-care, but about kind of owning your sense of self in your reputation. And what advice would you give to someone who was rising in profile now to try not to have to suffer some of the attacks that you and the Spice Girls did?
Yeah, I mean, I do like to think it has changed quite a lot since then. And you're right, and I do feel, I've been saying this quite a lot in interviews, that there's this narrative, isn't there, around women, you know, that we can't get on, that we can't support each other, that we're all bitches, do you know what I mean? And but it's about men being afraid of what women can achieve, in my opinion. So that was something we wanted to break down. Of course, like, people do, we live in very different times as well, in that there's a lot of gender fluidity as well. People identify differently now. And I like this idea that those lines are being blurred, and anyone can do anything. But it's, it would take forever, wouldn't it, for us to get to this point of us all feeling that way. I forgot what your question was. Oh, the advice.
What would you give to
The advice. I think the thing is, for me, what's taken me so long to try and get back to is trusting your own instinct. Because I think so early, we have it as children, and then I think it's just knocked out of us. And personally, for me, I believed for a long time people knew better than me. Oh, they must know better. They definitely, are more experienced than me, so they know better. But you know what? You know best. You instinctively know best what is right for you. And if something doesn't feel right, it's probably because it isn't, And so I would always say that to a younger artist. And I think to try and shut out the noise. And it's really hard, but it's really important. And, there are so many ways that we consume media now, but, obviously a lot of it is online, and it's like, don't read the comments. Because other people's opinions of you, it's none of your business, The other thing is, I don't like everybody and everything, so I can't expect them all to like me, and it's just kind of making peace with that.
That's lovely, thank you.
Some good questions online. Somebody said, "Hi Mel, serious question. If you're a biscuit, what biscuit would you be?"
Well, you know what? I don't know why a bourbon popped into my head, because they are probably the most minging biscuit ever.
It's a classic.
Yeah, it's a classic. I mean, I do like a chocolate hobnob, but I don't know if I'm a chocolate hobnob. I'm going to say a pink wafer.
Great answer. This is a question all the way from Perth, Australia.
I love people are nodding.
This is a question all the way from Perth, Australia, from Shane. Is it true that Bryan Adams asked you to duet with him on When You Were Gone, when you met him in a lift?
Oh, so it stemmed from the meeting in the lift. I was in LA with the girls. We were on tour, 98, and my mum was there. She's a huge Bryan Adams fan. And this guy got in the lift, quite a short guy, with a guitar on his back. I was like, I know him. And it was Brian. We'd met him at Top of the Pops. And so I said, oh, look, do me a favour, come and say hello to my mum. And he just sat with us all night and we had a few drinks. And he called me when I got back to London and said, look, I've got this song, I think you'd sound great on it. And that was it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And the classic was born. So this is an amazing question. Hi, Melanie. I've struggled with obesity my entire life and have been told that I was unworthy of love because of it.
Oh, my God.
At your event in London this week, you said that one's weight has nothing to do with who you are as a person. How important is it to relay this message to press, fans, etc.? That's an amazing question.
Oh my gosh, it's so important, isn't it? You know, as a society, the one that we live in, we are obsessed with the way that we look. And I recently, I spoke to Stephen Bartlett, and this is something that came up in our interview, and it's like, you know, we all lose people in this life. And I lost my nan. You know, she had a great innings. She was well into her 90s. She lived a long life, a long, happy life. And that's a Catholic side of my family. So at the funeral, you know, I saw a dead body for the first time in my life. And I was so scared. I was so nervous to do that. But I'm actually so happy that I did, because I realised it wasn't her. She's gone. You know, she's gone physically, but actually she's, you know, all of these people are with us. You know, they're in our hearts and they're in our memories. And it just kind of, emotional. It just compounded that thing, is that we are not this. This is not who we are. Or I spoke about an elder sibling that I lost to cancer, and I don't think of his physicality. I don't think of how cancer emaciated him at the end of his life. I think about his humour and his cheekiness. And so we're really not this physical thing. I mean, we need to try and look after it, right? Because we want to be here long enough to enjoy this place. But yeah, we're so much more than our physical being.
One more question from the room. I think there was a few around, and I don't want somebody's going over there. There's a question there from Jan.
Hi, Mel.
Hi.
I was just wondering if your daughter is showing any signs of wanting to go into the music industry, and would you recommend it to her or not?
I'm very relieved she isn't. Yes, I'm of great embarrassment to her. And she's 13. So, yeah, I mean, she can sing. And when she was younger, she was, like, really into doing the drama productions at school and stuff. But now she's way too cool. So, no, she's very creative, but I don't think she'll be a performer. And I wouldn't encourage it. But I'd support it if that's what she wanted.
I will have one more question online. In 2018, there were rumours that you were recording an album of covers, including Britney songs. What happened to this album? Will it be released?
I do have some recordings of covers, including a Britney song. Yeah, it was a little project I was working on, and actually some of them are very, very beautiful. So I'm hoping that they will see the light of day at some point.
And what are your plans generally in the next few years, apart from definitely playing Glastonbury next year?
Playing Glasgow, hopefully with the Spice Girls at some point.
Amazing.
You know, hopefully more Spice Girls shows. That's
Really?
an absolute dream. Yeah, it would be wonderful to do that again. Yeah, for me, more music, new music, more shows, a bit more DJing. You know, this is the thing, isn't it? We're really not on this planet that long. Let's just do the things we love as much as we can.
That is an amazing place to finish. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you. You're brilliant.
The Mishcon Academy Digital Sessions. To access advice for businesses that is regularly updated, please visit mishcon.com.